Let me just say this as well. We have a wonderful, wonderful church, and I am proud of you guys. And we have our own golden girls, and, you know, God's just building us just to yeah, for those who've been in the house of his presence, you know, we kind of talked about that one night. It's kind of fun, but we have seniors that don't even look like seniors in this house. It's so awesome. Yeah. Yeah. They're seniors incognito. 2 weeks ago, we began talking about discipling nations because we're moving into actually the implementation where we are actually moving specifically, purposefully towards expanding, enlarging, and increasing. And that's why the house and everything, we believe this house is not suitable for where we are down the road, and we'll be sharing more about that in the days to come. But even the sale of this building and why we're doing this, the property where we're going to be building on eventually, all that is together because we have the long-term picture where we're called to disciple nations. Honestly, nations. Discipleship. Jenya talked about discipleship in our class, in our ministry class, that he did such a wonderful time with that and teaching on that. You know, it's just like we disciple people, we disciple nations, and it's what we're called to do. So essentially, for the past 3.5 years, with House of His Presence and everything else we're doing, we're hosting His presence to host the nations. Because guess what? His presence is everything. Psalm 16:11, guys, you've made known to me the path to life. In your presence is fullness of joy. The path to life is his presence. If you can imagine like a tunnel that you would crawl through called his presence, you will find life. I guarantee it. If you pursue the presence of God, not revival, not blessings, not financial blessings, not spiritual blessings. You pursue his presence, himself. You go through that tunnel, as it were. You will find your life just goes boom. Honestly. The psalmist found out, he said, you've made known to me the path to life. In your presence is fullness. You want to come to the fullness of God, I'm telling you something, you will find life. We of course, we took the week off to kind of do yard work and different things. There's so much to do to keep a house. It's crazy. And to have a half-decent yard and to do good things. So a whole week. And because of that, we came to one house of his presence. I'm telling you, everything in me last night wanted to come. I didn't say it to Rosemary, but we had been here so many times because of the sale of the building. I said, okay, I'm just going to stay home tonight because it just like I need to have one day by ourselves. But everything in me, guys, was just I wanted to be here. It's that corporate presence that I'm telling you something, guys. I can understand why some of you would fall apart because you haven't been in it for a long time. When David said, my heart, my flesh cry out, do you know why he said that? Because he'd been in the tent a lot. And in that place, it was actually the manifest presence of God. So when he was away from that, he's going, my heart and my flesh cry out for this living God. And having not, like I've been in the house of his presence for 3.5 years almost every day. When we went to the Dominican the first year, we brought a little speaker so we could have house of his presence in our hotel room in the Dominican. Because that pursuit of the manifest presence is so incredible. There's life in it. So anyways, everything in me just was, I was scratching, you know. We should have gone because we had an awful time trying to find a piece of pie in the region anyways. We should have just gone to the house of his presence. We would have been happier. We're trying to find pie. Ruben, you guys probably had one sitting on your counter. We drove by your house trying to find a pie, and no one had a pie. We should have just come here. In his presence, you will find your agenda. All the blessings God has for you are there. So ultimately, we're hosting his presence to host the nations. Matthew 28 says we're called to disciple nations, right? We are actually called to not just disciple people in those nations, but actually nations. I love that. I get so excited about that. And the reason when I got so excited when I heard the offer, even though, we weren't sure when I got the prophetic word about what God's calling us to do to launch and all that, which we already know. I got so excited, and this is starting point, yes. We're called to disciple nations. However, and everybody listen to me, if you want to disciple nations with us, Everything is dependent upon the presence of God to do that. If you don't experience this, if you haven't become just completely engulfed and engaged in his presence, you need to do that to be part of what God's going to do with this house. I will never send someone out to disciple nations if you haven't been a lover of his presence. I just won't do that. So we ask the question, how do you disciple nations? I mean, seriously, the reason I think in many cases people have misread Jesus' commission is because they've looked at it and gone, this is so big, it's so overwhelming, it has to mean find people in the nations and disciple them one by one, and we can all put our minds around that thing and believe that's probably what he means. And that's the way I've lived for many years. That when he said disciple nations, he really means go to a nation and disciple people one at a time. And yes, that's part of it. But there's a much bigger plan where God says, I can do things faster. If you disciple nations, you'll also disciple people. And it'll be much quicker. And so how do we disciple nations? We saw last week the first thing, Isaiah 60, verse 1. We need to be a light to the nations so that, the nations will be attracted to the light. If we haven't got this light of the glory of God on us, then who's going to come to us? And that's why Joseph preached what he preached last week, church. If people would come in this door and go, this is no different than anywhere, they sense no presence of God, no depth, there's no anointing, people aren't getting healed. What do we got to offer the nations then? Do you understand? And that's why he preached what he preached, because he knows that there's, and I love that because he said after the temple, Jesus cleansed the temple. Guess what started to happen? People got healed, for crying out loud. Children came into their destiny. As soon as the house became the house of prayer and what it was supposed to be, bam, the purpose for the house began to be restated. People got healed. I never saw a healing in this house until we started hosting the presence like we're doing. Then we started seeing healings. Then we started seeing miracles and actual blind eyes being opened. That's when we began to happen. That's why I preach it. That's why we're doing House of His Presence. We got to get that lamp back, by the way, or we need some new ones, I guess. I don't know where the last one is. Wherever that lamp went, whoever took it out, we need to bring it back. But it's a prophetic mantle that says that lamp needs to be full so that it becomes the light that the nations need to see. So that's a prophetic declaration. And that's why he preached that, what he did, because it's burning in his heart. So I will say this to you. If we're going to disciple nations, we have to be a light. The number one thing for us is not go heal people. The number one thing for us is to host his presence. Did you hear that? When people come to me and they've said this before, I want to get on the streets, Pastor, let's go on the streets. But they don't love the presence of God. I'm not going with you on those streets. I don't care how many people you're talking to about Jesus. That's your own effort, not coming out of the presence. And I'm not going with you. There are people who don't love Jesus who love to do his work, though. I don't know if you know that. There are people who love signs and wonders more than they love Jesus. They love miracles more than they love his presence. They love the spectacular. They don't love the intimate. But why do you think Jesus in that passage said, get away from me, I never knew you? And they said, but we did miracles. We did all these things because they did things without the presence. So, how will we disciple nations? In order to disciple nations, we need what I'm calling a flood of glory. Number two, this could be almost like a whole series of how do you disciple nations. First of all, we need to be a light. Secondly, we need a flood of glory. Habakkuk 2:14 says this, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. How many are familiar with that verse? Habakkuk 2:14, everybody look at me. For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. That's a significant passage. Now, everybody stay with me. I am absolutely convinced of this. In order to fulfill the Great Commission of Matthew 28 to disciple nations, we need the glory of God to flood the earth. Some of the Golden Girls were in New Orleans last week, and they saw where the water covered New Orleans when the banks broke and the water came over. God's glory, it needs to flood the earth like that. Every city, every town, every region needs to have a flood of the glory of God. See, watch me now. Attempting to fulfill the commission that Jesus left for us without the glory, I believe will make it absolutely almost impossible. And there's my concern, is that we read the Great Commission, and here's what happens. Everybody watch this. We get feeling guilty. I got to do something to reach this harvest that Jesus said I should go do to. So we just go, but we're empty vessels. We go, we're empty vessels. But we feel guilty if we don't go, so we go, but we got nothing to give but sheer willpower, and we know we need to do this, so we go and we give a message. We pull out the 4 spiritual laws, and we rehearse something, but we got no power to back up the message. And that's happening all over the world in this day. We have focused on the message without what is supposed to send us. So how will that happen? How will the glory flood the earth? Turn to Isaiah 60, verse 1. I want to read these 3 verses again quickly. Isaiah 60, let's read verses 1 to 3. Isaiah 60, verses 1 to 3. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. Are we there? Okay. For behold, darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples, but the Lord will arise upon you. I love that. It doesn't matter how dark your situation is. It doesn't matter how difficult the days are around you. You can say, but Pastor, you don't know how evil it is in my workplace. It doesn't really matter. I said to Rosemary yesterday, you know what, if people will begin to, we got talking about this, and she said, you know, when I was in school, the impossible happened. Every Friday or once a month or what it was, a woman would come in and preach to the school in a public school. Rosemary gave her life to the Lord in a public school because a lady would come in and preach once a month. And then a pastor would come in and preach to the ones older. This is actually public school. And I said to her this, you know what I believe? I believe if you'll get a hold of what God's doing about discipling nations, He will make a place for you. It doesn't matter how dark it will be, and you can see miracles happen wherever you are. You will have a story like that anywhere. You can be the person who God uses in a dark place, because why? The glory of God will rise upon you. Come on. Let's get some excitement going here. For behold, darkness shall cover the earth, but the Lord will arise upon you, and His glory will be seen upon you. And nations shall come to your light, right? So we're discipling nations. Nations will come to not your good deeds, and we're going to talk about good deeds in a couple weeks. They're important. But the nations aren't going to be attracted to your good deeds. They'll be attracted to your light. And kings to the brightness of your rising. So what I'm seeing here is we're talking about how to disciple nations, and I'm saying we need a flood of glory. The glory will be seen upon you. Isaiah 60 makes it very clear. It's going to be a supernatural presence that makes a difference in the nations. Come on. A supernatural presence that's going to make the difference. It's the presence of the glory of God that's going to reveal God's goodness to the nations. But how will the glory flood the earth? And I see it 2 ways. I had this conversation with Derek Schneider when we were here. And I'm going to be meeting with him in a few weeks again to just discuss this more. Because I see a lot of people trying to be making an impact on the nations, but doing it in their own strength. So how will the glory flood the earth? And there's 2 ways I think it's going to flood the earth. Here's what I believe God's got for us here. First of all, the glory will flood the earth because of the tabernacle of David. I am absolutely convinced that the tabernacle of David, as it's being rebuilt, will change the atmosphere over homes, churches, businesses, towns, cities, regions, and even nations, and then glory will flood from that tabernacle of David. And it will change atmospheres anywhere. I'm going to be talking about this on Wednesday night to our class about the tabernacle of David, because we're talking about discipling nations. But the intimacy that comes from the people of God who exist living in the realm of the tabernacle of David, they will release a worship and a prayer and an intercession into atmospheres, and it will actually change spiritual dimensions and coverings over towns, over cities, all on its own. You don't have to go to City Hall with a sign and say, we fight corruption. You don't even have to do that. You can go and establish the tabernacle of David, and you can see atmospheres change. You can see crime go down. You can see poverty go down simply because you've welcomed the Lord into that place like David did, and atmospheres will change cities. But here's what happens. A lot of people go with that. They love it for a service. They love it for a week. They love it for a conference, but they haven't grabbed it for a lifestyle. When you have a tabernacle of David being established, it will change. Honestly, it will change new dimensions. We were talking this morning a little bit. It's pretty interesting. Kevin, we're going, there's the cry happening in Canada. There's Niagara Now. There's all kinds of things that are just starting to just surface, come from nowhere. How's this happening? Because the tabernacle is beginning to rise, and it just begins to change. David's entire life or as king is an example of the glory of God flooding the earth. Let me just tell you quickly. David built the tabernacle with the ark. I haven't got time to talk about that, but he hosted the presence of God 24/7. You know what happened? He brought the ark in the temple in this tent. They worshiped around the tent for 24 hours straight. They had musicians, they had singers, they had people to pray. They would do three things, basically: petition God for his blessing, they would worship, and they would praise, and they would give adoration around the ark 24/7. That changed everything. And so what happened is David did this for 37 years. 37 years. He became king, and he said, here's my number one priority. We're going to make this thing happen. So he established that, and while he did this, you know what scriptures say? He succeeded at everything he did. Come on. It says he hosted the presence for 37 years, and he succeeded all the time. How many want to do that? Succeed at everything you do. No failures in your life because you're in the presence. So then at the end of David's life, he passed the ark, which was the presence, over to Solomon, his son, to host it in the temple that he had built permanently for God. And watch what happens. You know the story. This is real fast. But for 37 years, they did House of His Presence, 24/7. Throughout those years, he got ready to build a temple. Then when he's old, passes the throne over to his son Solomon. Solomon takes all the preparations that David made for this temple, builds a temple. They move the ark into the temple. They begin to do in the temple now what he did in the tent. They offer this to the Lord. They have this big, huge offering. They declare this. They pray. After their prayer, fire falls from heaven, hits the sacrifice, consumes it all. And we're not talking about a couple roasts. We're talking about like thousands of animals. It was such a huge sacrifice. Fire actually comes from heaven. Whew. Movie stuff. Consumes it. Then what happens from that is glory is released. It fills the house so dramatically that the priests fall to the ground. Talk about being slain in the spirit. Whoa, what's going on? They actually fall to the ground. They cannot stand. The glory is so thick, no one can even enter the temple. But then people see the glory. It's just radiating off the temple. All the nation are outside watching this. So fire falls, consumes the sacrifice. Glory comes, floods the temple. So what I see here is this. Watch this. The fire and the glory affects the atmosphere over the people that are all there. And it says everyone falls to their knees and they begin to go, oh no, we're going to be undone by this God. The strangest thing happens. Fire falls from heaven. I mean, literally, falls from heaven, poof, consumes this huge sacrifice. Do you know what the people do? They fall to the ground and say, He's love, and His love endures forever. God is good, and His love endures forever. That's the strangest response. Think about it. Fire from heaven. That should bring fear. Burns up the sacrifice. And what happens? They go, God is good, and His love endures forever. Here's the point. The tabernacle of David changes hearts. It changes atmospheres so that people respond to God's goodness. That's what happened. Listen, the tabernacle of David floods the atmosphere with glory, and people's hearts are changed, and the remnant seekers respond, and they pour their love out to God. Now, if you read Amos chapter 9, I wish I had time to read it. I really don't have time right now. Amos 9 says what's going to happen. We have to read it. Let's go. Amos 9. Amos 9. Let's go there. Chapter 9, verse 11. You've got to see this. Are we there? Amos 9, chapter 11. All right? Okay. Amos 9, chapter 11 says, in that day, Amos said, I will raise up the booth of David, or the tabernacle of David that has fallen, and repair its breaches, and raise up its ruins, and rebuild it as in the days of old. Now, you understand, when Solomon took over the ark, he did a good job for a while, but then he fell. You understand? That's what happened to David's tabernacle. Solomon dropped the ball. And this whole seeking of the presence of God fell with Solomon. But now it's been prophesied that God's bringing that back again, and repair its breaches, raise up its ruins, and rebuild it as in the days of old, that they may possess the remnant of Edom and all the nations who are called by my name, declares the Lord who does this. Now watch verse 13. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when the plowman shall overtake the reaper, and the treader of grapes him who sows the seed. The mountains shall drip sweet wine, and all the hills shall flow. And it goes on to talk about further restoration. Here's the point. Watch this. Amos prophesied that when the tabernacle of David was rebuilt, there would be such a harvest that would come in. It would come in so quickly that the harvest would overtake the harvesters. Now, everybody listen to me. Everybody keep your eyes on me. We hear people calling for this 1 billion soul harvest. And everybody's saying, we want that harvest. We want the 1 billion soul harvest. We want that. But Amos says when the tabernacle is restored, the harvest is going to be so great that the harvest is going to overtake the harvesters. In other words, the harvesters are going to not even have, it's just like the harvest is going to come in on its own. That's Amos. That's Amos. So then when we jump into the book of Acts, Acts chapter 15, we see they're wondering, why is everybody getting saved? Why are the Gentiles getting saved? Why are there so many people outside of the Jewish nation getting saved? Well, and he goes, James says, it's because the tabernacle of David is being rebuilt so that the remnant seekers can come in. So how are we going to disciple nations? Unless the tabernacle is restored to release the glory, all our attempts to disciple nations, I believe, are going to be short-lived of what they could be. You know what we're like? Everybody likes shortcuts. I mean, how many of you have been in here on a night worshiping and you're almost thinking, man, I could be doing something substantial. I should go do something. This is just like worship. I should go do... We all want to take shortcuts, miss what it's going to release the glory, and go get doing something right away because we don't like the process. The process is too slow. We like to get out there, hands on, right now. But Amos said, when the tabernacle of David is rebuilt, the harvest will be so great that it will overtake the harvesters. See, here's what I see. Attempts to disciple nations without the glory, without the tabernacle of David, this will happen. We'll begin to do things without the supernatural glory, which is actually going to bring in the harvest, which means there's going to be a lot of people working harder than they have to work. And secondly, we're going to allow them doing things that we were never called to do. Remember Mary and Martha and Jesus in the house. Jesus comes over. Martha wants to make sandwiches for Jesus. Mary wants to sit at his feet and be in his presence. All Martha thought is, I should make sandwiches for Jesus. Jesus didn't want the sandwiches. He wanted what Mary was doing. That's what happens with so many people who want to disciple nations and reach the lost and see signs and wonders. They want to get on to make sandwiches that Jesus doesn't even want. And so what happens is we do a lot of busy work, which looks Christian-like, which will keep us entertained all our lives, but we'll miss our purpose. We'll never do the purpose for which you've called. And you know Ephesians 2:8-9 says that you were created in advance. There was good works created in advance for you to do. God already knows what you're supposed to do. He's already got your whole scheme together. He's built you for it. He's wired you for your plan. Ephesians 2:8-9 says you were created. He created these in advance for you. You just have to kind of find those things. But a lot of people won't go through the process, and what happens, they do somebody else's work, and they never get to their own. And so they have busy work, but not divine work. And they're making sandwiches that Jesus never asked for. Dwelling place, listen to me, the presence and glory of God are powerful enough to change atmospheres. I believe that with all my heart. Come on. The tabernacle of David is about worship. It's about prayer. It's about intimacy. It's about seeking the Father. That in itself, somehow when the church does that, when we become the tabernacle, there's an atmosphere shift that happens, and then the remnant of seekers start to get soft. Their hearts start to get ripe, and then someone comes and talks to them, and they get saved. You go, wow, I'm such a good soul winner. No, the atmosphere's changed. You got to fish in good water. Well, it doesn't mean you stay in the house all the time. There's going to be time. You've got to get out to the nations, but you've got to start with things first. Greenhouses of his presence, when they come like house of his presence, will release life that will begin to flourish in places where there was no life before. Strongholds get broken, and you didn't do it. Captives get set free, and you didn't do it. It wasn't your great deliverance ministry that did, oh, I'm so powerful in the Spirit. No, we worshiped and God broke chains. We worshiped and we stood last year on City Hall proper with a full band, and we worshiped. And they gave us permission that we had sound systems that echoed off the buildings, and we worshiped and we declared, God, you're good in Niagara. Honestly, it's changing the city, it's changing. That doesn't mean there's things we don't do, and I'm going to get to that in a couple weeks. But I just want you to be absolutely convinced that there's power in the tabernacle of David. There's power in worship. There's power in prayer. There's power to change atmospheres. Then when you go on, it's like you get to fish in a nice pond, and the fish will be ready. There's one last thing, and it's going to be quick. So how do we disciple nations? We said restore the tabernacle of David. That's why we're doing what we're doing every day. And Joseph, you said it well. It's so that we can reach the lost. It's so people can get healed. It's so that the lamp is always filled. Saw you bring it in. It's so the lamp will always be filled. It's so that there's always anointing oil to give away. Secondly, how do we disciple nations? The glory floods the earth wherever you go. Wherever you go, because you carry it, goes with you. Isaiah 60, go back to verse 1. I want to pull some things out of there very quickly. Isaiah says that the glory of the Lord has risen upon you. The glory of the Lord will be seen upon you. Nations shall come to your light. Kings to the brightness of your rising. Are you catching that? The tabernacle of David changes atmospheres. It releases glory, but at the same time, we carry that glory with us. We spread the glory wherever we go. Are you with me?
Yes.
Are we okay? Are you thinking about sandwiches already? You're being honest. Come on, the tabernacle changes atmosphere, so it's not hard to fish. The fish jump into your boat. How many of you have ever seen those pictures of, the guys go down the river and the fish are all jumping right into the boat? You've seen those?
Yes.
How many like that for prophetic? But honestly, I think that's what it's like when the tabernacle is restored. Do you know what often happens? This becomes one of the strongest things to actually go against. Because I hear it so often. Yeah, but you got to go do things. Very few people have the patience to sit back and become a tabernacle. In the kingdom, very few people have the patience to pursue the presence of God, to get ready. They just don't have the patience for the process. But the glory floods the earth wherever you go, because you carry it. You carry it, Sanji. That's why people respond. You carry it. The the tabernacle changes atmosphere, but you carry it. That means when we go somewhere, we go with the glory, and His glory floods the earth through us. The only problem is if we don't go, then we don't carry it. If we don't go, if we don't follow God, and here's an issue. A lot of people think they can debate with God on this. Well, I just live my life nicely, and I don't really want to get involved with this too much. That's too spiritual. And the only reason that the glory won't be flooding the earth through you is you decide not to let it happen. Bottom line. Where you go with glory. It's through His glory He floods the earth. Now watch this. We do not just go actively to make disciples. We go to carry glory. I have this vision. If you're going to go to another country to become a missionary, what I would do is I would establish a house of His presence first. My first response, okay, I'm going to be a missionary in this region, and some of you will go from this house to be missionaries. And you're going to go to a country somewhere, I don't care where it is. What I want to do is I want to send you to build a house of His presence first. Even if it's to India, you'd go there and you would establish, even if it had to be in secret, a place of His presence, and let the atmosphere begin to change and flood the earth. First goal. Missionary strategy. Flood the nation. Your first job is to go spend a year in praise and worship, changing the spirit realm. You realize Ephesians 3 tells us we're to declare the praise of Him who called us out of our... We're declared. We're supposed to speak to the... We're supposed to set in place the kingdom of God into the realm where the darkness exists. We are supposed to do that. That's the job of the church. Read Ephesians. So my first move would be to go to a country and set up a house of His presence. And if it's a town, believe that town is going to have a new atmosphere. And then when God shows us we're ready, we begin to launch out, begin to move, because the atmosphere has changed. You'd probably know, because people would probably start coming around you, finding, seeing the glory, and things would just start to open up. And pretty soon, I already gave you some of my strategy, but God showed me this years ago. We're going to be doing that. We're going to be going to different nations, establishing house of His presence to change atmospheres. Because you understand that what you see in the natural, it's being controlled by the spirit realm. Right?
Yes.
So go in, first of all, change the spirit realm through the praise, through the worship. Then go ahead and begin to disciple the nations. So where you go, it's not just about making disciples, it's about carrying glory. It means two things, and I close with this, and I really mean that. First of all, our message, first of all here, Habakkuk 2:14 says, the knowledge of the glory of the Lord will flood the earth. In other words, the knowledge of the glory of the Lord. Say that, the knowledge. What if people don't know God's good? I mean, I drive people crazy probably these days because somebody talks to me and say, yeah, but that's because God's good. I had a wonderful chance with a man from the Fireman's Park there. I showed him the Beamer, and he was so jealous. Because he had a Beamer in the 70s that he paid for. And when I told him the story, I said, yeah, but God's just so good. You know, we had a chance to just If we're going to carry the glory with us, that means one thing. That's the knowledge of the glory of God that must spread. In other words, our message must always reveal good news. If you declare a message that's not good news, you're not declaring the gospel. If you declare a message to somebody else and somebody walks away from you saying, that guy's an idiot, religious guy, you probably didn't declare the good news. You probably didn't declare good news. You probably declared a religious message. Because even Jesus said the gospel is good news. The reason people reject the message is because they don't see good news in that. They don't see the goodness of God in that. So that means our message, because if the knowledge of the glory of God is going to flood the earth, then you're the ones who are going to declare it. You're the ones who have to tell people, wherever you go, you have to talk, God is good. Daily conversations, He's good. You must always talk. That means the glory of the Lord will flood the earth through the proclamation of God's goodness, through how we speak of God. Bill Johnson said this yesterday again, and here's where he was talking about the same passage about the glory flooding the earth. And he said this, he said, until the goodness of God becomes a bedrock for us, we won't be able to be sustained in life. You cannot sustain life without a bedrock of God's goodness. But see, the world's fallen apart because the knowledge of that glory has not been released. Everywhere you go, you carry the glory, but you proclaim the glory. And finally, our lives must reveal the goodness of God working through us. We proclaim it, and we live it. We proclaim He's good, and we live it. Stand. Jesus said this. He told the people, if you do not believe me, at least believe the works that I do. Okay? That's what Jesus said. If you don't believe me, at least believe the works that I do. Now watch this. We carry glory just for the fact that you're in a room. If you're somebody who hosts the presence of God, you walk in a room, I guarantee you're not going to be the same as other people. I don't care if they're all swearing and telling dirty jokes or whatever, you're going to stand out as light without saying a word, because you carry the radiance of the glory of God. It'll be seen on you. But because the glory goes with you, you also, because it's the knowledge of the glory of God, that means the knowledge must be spoken. You must proclaim it. You must tell people God's good. You must declare it. But that's not even enough. You must live it. In other words, you must be able to go to and lay hands on someone and see them get healed. Jesus said, don't just believe me, believe the works I do. If you don't believe me, then believe the works I do. If you don't believe me when I tell you God's good, then watch what He does in my life. So the point is this, we're talking about how do we disciple nations. First of all, the tabernacle of David. That in itself will flood the earth. But secondly, you carry the glory with you wherever you go. We are carriers of His glory. We proclaim it and we live it.